are painting a shark. I don't know what kind of shark this is. You guys will have to let me know. The reference photo is over at my website. Link is in the video description if you want to paint along with me. I'm going to be working on a Frederick's. This is a watercolor canvas board. And the reason that I go with a watercolor canvas board, obviously I'm not working in watercolor. This is an acrylic painting video, but this canvas is super, super smooth. This was provided to me by Frederick, so thank you for that. But they were already the only canvas I used, so there you go. Or the only brand I used, I should say. I really like their watercolor canvas board. The blue label and the Belgian linen are my absolute favorites. And the Convexo canvas because of the shape. So with this one, it is really, really smooth, and that is why I'm going with this. And I've already pre-painted a coat of black acrylic paint on this so that I'm not fighting the white of the canvas as I go. This will pop into any standard 8x10 frame. And one of the things that I like, especially with this size, with the canvas boards, if you've used like generic stuff from Michaels or Hobby Lobby, their canvas boards warp like crazy. The 8x10s, I have not had a problem with that with Frederick's. Now, the bigger 16x20s, if they're sitting wrong long-term and they're not framed, those I've had warp a little bit, but when you frame them, they're fine. So these are definitely a more sturdy, hardy, like hold their shape better than most other canvas boards, plus they're really smooth. The other thing that's really nice with these, you don't need your typical open like painting frame, which can cost a lot more. You can get a cheapo like 8x10, any frame from Walmart, Target, wherever, and all you do is pop out the glass, pop this in its place, done, framed, ready to hang on the wall. Like these are the easiest thing in the world to frame, and especially this being a common size. So the first thing we're gonna do, whenever I'm working in acrylic, I'm gonna work with whatever is farthest in the back and move my way forward. So that is gonna be the background. So I'm gonna start with a whitish kind of gray blue, like a light bluish gray. I'm just gonna throw all those words together, and some of them have to work. And I'm going to fade down into a medium blue and then down into the black. I'm not gonna worry about the ripples in the water. Again, this reference photo is over at my website if you wanna follow along. So starting out, these are all the colors from last week. And this is the nice thing about this palette. I believe I have this linked in the video description. These colors still wet from, well, see, now they're all over my hand, from last week. All because of being kept in what's essentially a big Tupperware for paints. So I keep a paper towel that's damp, or wet really. I just keep that in there, and it has a lid that seals it off, just like your big Tupperware type lid. So all of this paint, these portions where I was mixing that are flat, that's dry. But the chunks, those are still, as you can see, they're on my hand now, those are still wet. When I clean it, all I do is take the razor blade that I lost and just scrape the paint right off the glass palette. So it's really not very wasteful compared to other methods that I've used in the past. This is a much, like, I'm not wasting as much. The paint lasts longer. Like again, all this paint's from last week and it is perfectly good. I'm gonna go with Phthalo blue. I've already got black out, but let's go ahead and put some more, just because I'm probably using a lot of that tonight. Probably am good on the white, but just in case, we'll add a little more. And then I'm gonna use a little bit of turquoise. Now, if you don't have turquoise, you can mix your own by adding green. I usually do phthalo blue and phthalo green, about a 50-50% mixture, and it gives me a really pretty teal turquoise type color. Now I'm going to go ahead and mix water. The other thing you want to have handy, this is a fine mist sprayer. This is priceless. If you paint in acrylics, trust me, pick one of these up. This one's a name brand one. I think I got it from Blick, but you can get, I've also got the ones that are the generic ones from Amazon. These are so handy. It mists a fine enough mist that you're not getting those heavy droplets like you would a normal spray bottle. And so I can lightly mist this, keep it wet. I can keep it wet for hours if I wanted to. So if you painted with acrylics and you have a hard time with them drying too fast and you're not able to get things to blend well, this is what you want. I am going to mix water, and one of the things you unfortunately cannot see is I've got my water over here. I'm dipping the brush in the water, and then I will come over here. Now you can see as the water's mixing in there. I'll go ahead and mix the lighter color first, and I'm just gonna mix a bit of everything here. Now, because this is a more grayish tone, I'm gonna pull a touch of black in there just to gray it up. If ever you have a grayish tone that you want, the way that you achieve that is black and white and then whatever color that you want mixed in. Let's go way lighter than that. So now, right now, this is actually a good color, but there's so much of it that if I want a lighter version of that. If I keep mixing white into that, I'm just gonna waste a ton of paint. So what I'm gonna do instead, take a chunk of paint just with what's on that brush. And now I've got two different tones, the lighter version, without just continuously stirring into that same pot. So this is what I'm going to start with. We're gonna come over here to the easel. I am going to do a light mist first over the canvas. And you don't have to do that first. You can just start painting on it with water. It just makes it a little easier because everything's going to glide smoothly now. So I've got this lighter area here. And if that starts to dry, I will just start adding more, I'll mist it again with the water. So I have so much paint from mixing on that brush. I'm just going to wipe some of that off. And I'm going to reload with that darker color now. And we're just going to go right onto the canvas. And just let those mix together. And I'm going to go even more of a pure color, the blue and the turquoise. I'm just slopping them together. Nothing needs to be perfect. Now that I want to stay wet so I can mist it if it does start to dry, but I'm going to just wipe it off on there. I'm going to pick up just straight blue and start getting darker. And I don't really care if there's too many streaks because we're going to be putting so many little ripples in there. Now I'm going to go straight into black. Now there is still a little bit of white on this brush. If I go straight into black, I'm just going to turn it into a charcoal gray. So I'm going to wipe my paint off the brush first. And now I'm going to go ahead and load it with black. And we're going to let these two colors just mix together. Again, this needs to stay wet. If yours is starting to dry, go ahead and mix or mist it with water. Or if you don't have a mister, you just load more water on your brush, like I'm going to do right now. So it's a little bit more wet. And I'm going to do a couple of brush strokes here. Don't overdo this or you just create a muddy mess. Just a few brush strokes to soften this transition up. And the rest of that, I'm going to soften out with a mop brush. So what a mop brush is I'm using a powder brush, so a makeup brush. And I'm just going to very lightly go over this. I am not pushing very hard. This needs to stay wet. If it starts to dry, it is, there's the right button. If it starts to dry, it is not going to do what you want it to do. So work fast or use your fine mist sprayer if you need to. And I just want to soften these brush strokes out. I'm not trying to blend the colors together. That you should be done with the other brush first. This is just for softening out those brush strokes. Now, if it starts picking up a lot of paint, like right now you can see that just came off on my hand, that's picking up too much paint. So it is going to start creating brush strokes instead of taking them away. So I'm going to dry that. I'm going to go in circles. I'm going to dry that brush, get all that off, and now I can go back with it. Or pick up a new clean brush and use that. That's your other option. Whoops, there was a big chunk of black there. It was on the edge of the canvas and the brush picked it up. So we'll just blend that in. But again, this doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to put all of those ripples, but go for close, just so you're not spending too much time trying to undo something. And that is good enough. Now, to rinse this brush, all I need to do is dip the very tip of the bristles into my water. I don't need to get the whole thing wet because there should only ever be paint on the very tips of this brush. I've seen videos where people will use this to apply paint. It's not a practical idea. It doesn't give you very much control, and these brushes hold so much paint, so much water, like you would be wasting so many materials, and you don't have great control. Can you get good results doing that? Sure, but they're not better than using a brush that's more suitable for the technique. I don't ever use these to apply paint. And like I said, there's a guy I will follow on Instagram, and he's a great artist, but he's wasting a ton of paint doing this, and it's much, much harder to control. He'll do it for like clouds and such. There are way better brushes for that are more practical. I mean, use what works for you, but why are you wasting paint? I don't know who's got money for that right now. This is much, much better. Now, another fun fact about your paint, there is a video that is always one of the top acrylic painting videos, I guess because I think it's because he says stuff no one else says, and he's saying stuff, the reason no one else says it is because it's all BS. The video is so dumb. But anyway, drives me crazy because it's so like inaccurate. But one of the things that video says, so you've probably seen it, is that your water with acrylic painting needs to be clean all the time. So you should have a separate brush for your water and a separate for loading, like mixing water in with your paint, and a separate one for rinsing your brushes. There's no reason for that. That's watercolor. Like, I don't know why he's making that up. That is watercolor. Watercolor and acrylics are not the same. This paint my water, I don't know if I can get it to where you can really see. Look at how dirty that is. That is like mud, and it will make no difference. At no point do I need to clean that out. It can be mud, and your paint, your whites, everything will come out super bright, just like they did before. This is not watercolor. That's not a problem. Your water can be dirty. Let's go ahead and dry this. The main way that I can tell this is dry, I work with Liquitex Basics. They are my absolute favorite acrylic paints. Not because they're cheap, that's just an added bonus. because they just work with my techniques, but they're matte, they dry more matte. And there's a little gloss, you can see there. When there is a lot of gloss, that's usually when I know, and I can feel it because it's a little tacky, that is not 100% dry. So that I will need to make sure is completely dry before, excuse me, before I start painting the shark. But for doing the water ripples, this will be fine. I have a small flat, so that one being that it's handy and out, we'll go ahead and go with that. Now I'm going to go with a slightly lighter version of the white that was already there. So you can see I'm just mixing that off to the side into this. So it's not straight white. I want it to be a little bit more subtle than what I would get with straight white. Now the other thing is whenever I'm going to paint, I don't ever just load the brush and go straight onto the canvas. I normally will dab it. This is why you can always see brush marks there or on the front of my easel. I will generally dab it a little to make sure I don't go too crazy, because sometimes I have so much paint on that brush. So I just want to start creating the look of these little ripply guys. And I don't want to push very hard. If I push harder, get a thicker line, then let less pressure to the brush will give me a thinner line. I'm going to reload that. Oops, that one has a little bit more blue in it. Ooh, that has a decent amount more blue. Where'd you come from? And don't worry, if you have a shaky hand, that is going to work better for this. Think too much coffee. And I want some of these to be thicker, so I'll fill some in a little bit. And as I move my way down, I will shift to where it's just a lighter version of whatever there is. So let's go ahead, and we've got some different ripples in here, some different shapes. That's a bit too much water. I'm just going to dab that brush on a paper towel. You can see I kind of double up on some of these. So as I do a line, see how I keep pulling it out? It's very similar to how I would do wood grain, sort of. And you're not trying to make it look all the exact, like if some of it's a little bit brighter, good. We want that variation. I'm going to turn the brush to start getting some different brush strokes in here. In this, getting the ripples does take a little bit of practice to get comfortable with. When you're new to doing that, I would say copy as close as you can to your reference photo. But as you get comfortable, the reference photo is a very loose guideline. It does not need to be exact. But it took me years to really get the hang of the movement there. So if you're uncomfortable with that, that's normal. But do start just copy close. It's kind of like with clouds. When you first start painting clouds, you want to go a little bit closer to your reference photo as you're learning the movement. But as you get going, your reference photo is a very loose guideline. You'll get to where you can go through it very quickly because you've done clouds so many times. You know how they move. You know how to paint in those shapes. I want to start getting some variation of like the chunkier white bits in here. Technical term, chunkier white bits. You can see I'm filling some of this in. The other thing, you want to watch not to keep doing the same brush stroke again and again. It's very easy to do, but it will start giving you a very unnatural look. Variation is key. Yeah, some of these I can go in and make a little bit thicker. And then as I start coming down here, I want to get more into the teal colors, or the lighter blues, darker blues, whatever. Go with what I'm painting, not with what is coming out of my mouth, because that is apparently not accurate. This is going to be too light. Maybe. Yeah, needs more white. Not too light, too dark. See, I'm telling you, the words are not right. I'm really bad at the words. There we go. And this is just going to start following pretty much the same patterns. And I'm not going to go as crazy as my reference photo there. This is two photos and some Photoshop to get it to look that way with like the lighting and stuff. But the way that those ripples are, if I do it just like that, it's going to distract from the shark. So mine will be a little bit more subtle. Remember, push harder to get a thicker line. If you want a thin line, you're just barely letting the bristles touch the canvas. And if you're working on a canvas that has too much tooth, it's really bumpy, you're not going to get the same smooth lines I'm getting. So if you are struggling, don't beat yourself up over it. The canvas is often to blame when your brush strokes are just harsh and you're not getting those nice, long, smooth lines. The canvas really does make a huge, huge difference. So one of the things you can do if you are working on a canvas that is too rough, but you already bought them and you don't want to, you've got them, you may as well use them. Throw a couple coats, 2-3 coats. I usually do 3 coats of gesso. I use Liquitex gesso and I apply it, I don't have one over here, but with like I just use a sponge brush, those cheapy little craft sponge brushes, but I think it's a 2-inch or a 3-inch. I put a layer, let it dry all the way, put another layer, let it dry, another layer, let that dry, and then I take about a 320, is that a thing, 320? 3 something grit sandpaper and lightly go over it. A 220 works as well. Something in the 200 to 300, 400 range. Any of those are going to work the same. And I just go over it and sand it, and that will give you a much smoother finish. So if you have already, I know, I've been there. If you've already bought some canvases and they're a bit too rough, then that is something that you can do that will make them easier to work on. We've got some of these little circly guys. A lot of this will start getting covered with the shark, and that's fine. See right here, I don't know if you can really see, it's kind of dotted. I didn't do a nice good brush stroke there, so that is certainly something that I need to adjust. I need more paint and more water on my brush. Much better. Now it flows nice and smooth. See, and this would be an example. These are 2 very similar brush strokes. 2 is fine. Too many where you keep going the same way, you start looking like a child's coloring book. Break that up, change the shape some. And again, I'm using a very light hand. You don't want to push hard unless you want super thick lines. Another thing is to make that color fairly subtle. I only want this a few shades lighter than the paint that I'm going over. If I go too light on this, it just stands out too much. Now the other thing that I could do though, let's say I went way too light on all of this. One of the solutions would be, once that dries, is to glaze just blue and water over it. So lots of water, a little bit of blue. That would be a method to tone a lot of that down. So let's say you just did all of it with white. You don't want to worry about trying to get lighter as you move down. And that would definitely work. White all the way through, dry it, and then glaze. So again, more water than paint, and then your paint, and just tint the color, and that will tone that down. And you get really cool effects that way because of the way that the light refracts through each of those layers. I'm going to go darker even now. We're almost done with that background, and we can get started on the shark. And this will be a lot. This won't look as bright when it's dry. It's the way that the light is currently refracting through the wet paint. It's not that the color is shifting as it dries. It may appear that way. The color itself is not changing. It's that the light is not shiny anymore. It's because of this being as bright with the bright lights over it and the water in there. That's what's causing it to look brighter. A lot of people think that acrylic paints shift color, and it's like, no, it's just that it dries really fast, and so it appears that way, but that's not really what's happening in most cases. The only colors that I've really seen, that's enough for the background, the only colors I've really seen shift with acrylics were teals. Like, they always dry darker, whether I buy it a teal or I mix it. They always dry a little bit darker. But other than that, most of the colors are not actually shifting. It's that the water is drying, and so you don't have that light refracting through quite in the same way. But when it dries, then you can put your varnish over it. It makes it look wet again. Not as much. Like, this would never look as bright white as it did when I first laid it down. That was just an issue of how much water I had. I don't know if that makes any sense. Okay, I'm gonna dry this. Now, once I get the shark painted in, there is a very good chance I'm going to come through and make some adjustments with this. I don't want to do it right now because let's see where the shark is going to land. Now, I've already pre-drawn him out on a piece of tracing paper. So all I do, just to save time, you can freehand if you want, or in this case, I just stuck the tracing paper to my computer monitor, traced out my subject, and I'm going to tape the tracing paper to the painting. And I've got paint that is wet. And it's not dry all the way. Okay, and now I'm going to take a piece of transfer paper and a stylus that I saw earlier. There it is. Oof. And we're going to draw this guy in. So I'm just going to stick this in here. And even if you want to freehand, I would still do the same thing. I would freehand, go ahead and draw your shark on another, like a pad of paper, and then use tracing and transfer paper to get it clean on here. Otherwise, if you're drawing, you could draw with a white charcoal pencil, draw your shark in. But you're going to have eraser marks everywhere. Unless your first time through, everything's perfect, great. Otherwise, you will have eraser marks places. And I don't want that. I want this to be very clean. The other thing I've seen people do, they'll pre-draw everything out with a graphite pencil and then paint over it. One, the graphite will usually, depending on how thick you put the paint on, for me, it normally shows through. Most of your acrylic paints have a transparency to them, so not cute when you see the graphite lines through. But the other thing is, can you imagine trying to paint around this shark and make that all smooth? It's hard enough making it smooth without the shark there. Like, that is just impractical. So doing it in this order makes your life much easier, and you are much more likely to be successful in painting. And I just have to lightly go over that. You can see the lines underneath. You can see the shark. And this really just saves a ton of time too. You're not fixing mistakes, you're not, like, all of that's already been drawn. Now let's say I paint over this, and what I probably will do is just paint it so it's all smooth, and then come back through with the tracing and transfer paper again and draw any details back in. Not that he has a ton of details, but if I lose them, I can just quickly go over it again. Okay, that's probably good enough. There we go. And then if you do have anywhere, like the transfer paper, oh my gosh, I smudged that. Hold on. Let me take a little bit of water. I can fix that. I'm just going to take water and a paper towel and go right over that, clean that right up because that paint underneath is dry. Problem solved. Okay. So we're going to start. I want a Taklon bristled filbert. This one will work. Oh wait, you're in a way healthier condition though. Let's get some of these tools out that I'm going to need. Ooh, no, you. Much better. Okay, so Taklon bristled filbert, you can see it's got that rounded end. I'm not going to use the flat brush because the flat gives me harsh start and stop points. This is much easier to get really smooth lines, but I do want to make sure it's in good condition, meaning it's not a fluff ball. Can you see this one, how it's kind of fluffy? Look at the difference. This one is in much healthier condition. It's not been damaged. Now, don't throw your fluff balls away. They have other technique. When you've damaged a brush, they'll be able to do things that your healthy brushes can't. So keep them, but not for this. For this, I want a healthier brush. So again, I'm going to thin that with water. I'm going to use the exact same colors that I used on the water. I'm just going to first start by getting everything lined in, and then we'll go through and start working with more shading. You can use a smaller brush for the smaller areas if that's more comfortable. Don't feel like you have to use the exact same brush that I'm using. If you are more comfortable with small, that works. And that's something I've seen where teachers will take the small brushes away from their students and be like, no, you must use the big brushes. You're going to naturally get to where the more you paint and draw, you will get comfortable using your bigger brushes. I don't think it's something that you have to force. But you'll get to where you can make the big brushes do the same thing as your small brushes. That's just going to happen naturally on its own. You can see I'm not worrying about any shading, anything like that right now. Just let's block him in. Now, as much as I say no shading, I lied a little bit. I am going to pull a bit more white when I get down to the belly. And I'll be correcting all of these shaded areas better in a moment here. We'll get this blocked in and dry it first. Oops. Let's keep inside the lines, Lisa. Take a wet brush, and I'm just going to erase that. So if you have that happen, as long as your previous layer is dry, you just take a brush, add a little bit of water. It is now an eraser. Okay, and let's go ahead. I'm going to add a bit of the darker color, some blue with black, just for this area to blend these two so I get a slightly soft transition. And we're going to do another layer and blend this better. This is just mapping it out, so nothing needs to be perfect. Actually, I'm going to go right over the mouth. We're going to draw that back in. I don't know why I'm making my life more difficult than it needs to be. It's going to look a little weird here for a bit. Okay, we're going to dry that. Okay, while that, I'm going to leave that for a second. I'm going to come back up here and do a little bit of work on the lines that I previously did. I'm just going to take some blue and make some of these a little bit thicker, and I can go right over the shark. I don't even care about that right now, but now that I can see where he is, I can get, and this is really translucent. I'm using a lot of water here. I'm just breaking some of these up, making them a little thicker. And just the same blues I already used. It's subtle. It's just toning some of these down. It gives me some more variation. And this won't be as bright. Well, you guys can't, it doesn't actually show that much. In person, because of the way the water is lighting that up, it shows up more. There we go. Now I can just keep it wet, same thing as I blend this out, and use that. We're going to start with light. Oh, this may be a bit too much water. Overdid it. So you just start looking at your reference photo. Where are your lights and darks? That's what we're going to start watching for now. Hopefully staying inside the line a little bit better than me. Again, I want to keep that wet, and I'll start loading more blue. And let these blend together. If it starts to dry, I'll just mist that with my fine mist sprayer. Now this doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. Close is close enough because we will be going over it with the rays of light bouncing around on his back. So as long as you're close, you'll be fine. That is starting to dry, so let's go ahead and mist that just a little. I need to get some black mixed in with this. Now, the added bonus with mixing black in with this, it's also, because I've already got white in there, it's going to start giving me a bit of a grayish tone, which I want. Let's see how I can just start mapping this out, like putting in about where it goes. And as long as I keep misting it with that fine mist sprayer, I have all the time in the world to blend. Until that's starting to dry just a bit, just a light mist. Got this dark area on the fin there. Okay, and we've also got the dark around this edge. I want to start blending that up into the white. And a little bit on this fin as well. It's in the distance, we don't want that as bright anyway. This is starting to dry, so we'll just mist that again. And now I'm going to rinse this brush out. I'm going to go ahead and lightly go over this. Let's start blending this a bit. So this brush is barely damp. And you can blend it so it's very similar to how you would blend oils. The added bonus here, though, is when we're ready for that layer to dry, we can just dry it and go right over. But if it starts to dry, you've got to mist it. It is not going to give you great results if you try blending over where it's like half dry. That starts creating a hot mess. And it is not cute. Hence, hot mess. Okay, let's get some blue around this edge. And believe it or not, really the hard part of this painting, the majority of it is done. The rest is pretty much a breeze. It's a little too blue. I actually prefer a bit more black here because the bottom being as dark as it is. There we go. Get some white in here. And I just mixed it with what was already on the brush because I don't want actual white. I just want to lighten that up a bit. Right in through here. I'm going to darken that again. And I'm not even having to rinse my brush. I am using these same, like I'm just letting it create that mud because it's just darkening the color. Oh, that's not dark enough. That's already there. Like I'm not, if I was using red and then I have to go to yellow, okay, then I would have to rinse the brush. But these are all very similar colors. Lightly mist that. Actually, at this point, I think I'm going to take, this is one of the things when the brush is a little bit fluffier, it gets pretty handy. I'm going to use a separate brush just for smudging things out now. And then I'll use this brush for applying the paint. In this area, when we get into this stage, we're really worrying about our values because that's what's going to make such a difference in that end result. Dark's dark enough, light's light enough. This will make it look more three-dimensional. If you have one flat color, like people get really worked up when they're painting, if they just knew the right color. If you have the perfect color, great, you have a cartoon. We don't want that. We want to get the shading in there. We want to get those shadows. So the color doesn't, you don't even have to use the same colors as me. You could do this with purple instead of replace my blue with the purple and it would still look as realistic if you get your values in there correct. Dark's dark enough, light's light enough. That is what is going to make your work look realistic. And of course, I mean, you want to have a fairly accurate drawing, but even if your drawing is perfectly accurate, if you don't get your values in there, it doesn't matter how perfect your drawing is. It's not going to look three-dimensional. And look at how as I keep going in and working on the shading, how it just keeps changing, keeps adding more depth. But nothing is drying here because of that fine mist sprayer. That is such an important key. And how often you have to spray yours depends on how humid your room, the room you're in. Like if your heater is running, it's going to dry a lot faster. It's 100 degrees out right now. Oh, we're down to 97 at 9 p.m. But it's been hot here in Texas. So we have our air conditioning running all day. I don't find that dries things very much. Plus it's been fairly humid out. But like if you have a ceiling fan going, that is going to dry it more. Okay. I need a slightly smaller brush for these smaller fins. I'm going to dry it, do a little bit more shading, and then we'll do our highlights, which is the funnest part to me, and the rays of light. So I think the rays of light on this one, can't decide if I want to do the airbrush or paint it by hand, because if I paint it by hand, I can get a little bit more, like make it more defined, which I kind of want on this one, not as soft. How about I'll do it by hand, and if I don't like it, I'll go over it with the airbrush to soften it up. So I'm going to define that fin. We've got the underside there. Okay, I think I really want to dry this layer now, so I don't start messing it up, because it's getting to the stage where it's starting to dry. So that will, it's more likely to start lifting paint and creating a mess. I mean, I could mist it again, but I'm getting to that stage where it's like, let's dry it and then glaze over that. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and use the transfer paper again and get his mouth drawn in. His mouth and his eyes. I mean, I can freehand it, but why? I've already drawn it. You know, like, just make your life easier. Kind of like the guy painting with a mop brush. Like, does it work? Sure, but why are you making your life harder than it needs to be? So we've got his little eye. And now I'm going to use a liner brush to add this, if I can find it. There it is. We'll just do that with black. So we've got the eye. And oh, I want to add blue to that. I don't want it to be that black. That'd look weird. There we go. Oh, notification just about made me jump. So I'm going to just go ahead. I can do it with this. I want to start building these darker bits and just smudging that with another brush. And because what was already on there is dry, it doesn't lift it or cause any issues. You can start really getting that shape. Now notice that I'm not doing those bright highlights yet. We're saving that. That goes last. Let's get these in now. See how I can go over that and then just take this damp brush. I'm just going to smudge out that shadow. And then like here, I'm smudging too high. I'm going to get this brush wet again. It just had too much paint. And then smudge at the top. Look at how that just gives you this perfect, it looks like oil paint. You can make acrylics look just like oil. I hear from people, actually one of my favorite things was the person who said, if you want oil paint it to look like oils, just use oils. Or I could just make the acrylics look good. I mean, learn how to use the medium. You can make it look however you want. So this is one of the ways that you do it to get this nice blending, is take that separate wet brush and smudge over it. Now it takes some getting used to. And even with me, I've been doing this for years, it will occasionally give me some weird results and I have to go over it a couple of times. Like if it's not, if it's a little too wet, a little too dry, you have to play around with it. But look at the amazing shadows and details and all of that, just lightly going over it. And this is the next trick. Notice when I go over it with the second brush, I don't keep reworking it again and again. It's like 2-3 brush strokes and stop. So we've got a little shadow here, just a little, and I'm going to pull that in. Think of this with painting. I think of it as sculpting. You're creating shapes and form in there. You want to make it look three-dimensional. We're not doing a cartoon. We've got to get those shadows. And notice like his belly would be more white. Like if he were out of the water, which would be unfortunate for him, his belly would be more white, but he's under the water. So we've got to get that reflection of the water in there. Let's see, he's got his gills up here. Just a hint, and I'm not going to go crazy with those. We've got a definite muscle. Wanted to find that a bit there. Okay, and I think most of the rest of this, when we come through with the highlights, will give us what we need. Next, I'm going to take a round brush. I don't want it to be quite as small as the liner. And I'm just going to go with the light blue again. And now we're going to start I need two things. One, I need a clean, slightly damp brush. We'll go with a smaller one this time. It doesn't really matter what brush, but just to show you the sizes I'm using, I've got my round, and I've got, this is the one that's slightly damp I'm going to use to blend. So that's already going to be too dry. Oh, I can tell. Let's add a bit of water. And we are going to start creating, this is the darker line. I'll pull highlights over it. Let's just come around here. Let's get his fin. But we want to do this in at least 2 tones. So a darker blue, and then we'll come back with the highlights. And these need to be slightly curved to start creating so his body looks curved. We've got the highlight right along the back of that tail. We've also got highlight coming here. And this is also the stage, if your shark is looking fluffy, things aren't totally smooth, smooth them out now, like these edges. Now is the time to make that nice and smooth. And I'm going to smudge that. So see, I'm just smoothing out the edges right now. Right along the top. And then if I want to soften that just a little bit on the inside, not the outer edge, I want that outer edge nice and sharp. And he had a little highlight over his eye. And then along this fin. Okay, now back to creating the lines. So the fin is going to change opposite. Look how this curves up, and it's like a kind of like a weird shaped backwards Y. These curve back. I'm going to soften that a bit. It's funny, I'm seeing some of the comments of you guys talking about being afraid of the sharks. When my mom found out that I was going to be painting a shark tonight, she literally whined at me, "A happy shark? Like, what do you mean a happy shark? You know, a happy one? Like with the person's arm hanging out of its mouth? Like, what are you looking for here?" And she's like, "No, like a cartoon." I'm like, "No, I'm not painting a cartoon happy shark." So those of you who are not fans of these guys apparently are not alone. My mom is with you. I just thought it was funny she actually whined. So see again on the fin how I curve back on that highlight. I'm just creating where the rays of light are creating that reflection on his skin. It just gives a lot of interest. almost done with him. Lightening up the belly just a bit there. Thank you. See, says, I can't read that. Says, looks like a happy shark. Thanks. I thought so. He makes me happy. I mean, I don't want to go swim with him. I'm not going to mess with him. It's his ocean, but I used to like swimming. I'm from originally Southern California, and I used to like to swim in the ocean until I really got into reef keeping and I learned what was in that water. I was like, yeah, no, I'm out. I'm good. Have fun with that. Lay down, Wade. So now I'm using white. Now I'm coming through with some of these brighter highlights. I'm going to smudge that was a little bit too bright, so I'll just smudge that out a little bit. This is where we start getting just, and it needs to be subtle. We're not trying to make it like over the top here. And I'm hitting the, just kind of where some of these light rays that we drew in just a second ago are meeting. And it starts to look shiny. If you do this, if you do the white over every single line, it won't look so shiny anymore. Just get some of them. Let some of that previous darker layer show. See how on that fin, I just pulled that one spot. That will make that just stand out so much. Now the reference photo did not have these rays of light, so you might think, well, how would you know where to add them? Practice. I've done a lot of paintings where it did have the rays of light, and you do so many of them that you can take a photo that maybe isn't as great, but you like the angle, which was the case in this one, and I like the shadows on this one too. But I went ahead and I was able to just, well, that's what the reference photo is all photoshopped. It's actually very easy once you've done it correctly a few times. So if you don't have a reference photo that has the rays of light, and you're trying to learn how to do that, you need to find the photo with the rays of light first. Copy that several times, and then you can use a photo without that, and you know how to add them in. But it'll make it way more interesting looking. Oh, that is a big chunk of paint. What the heck did I do there? Thin that out. See, I'm just a few of these making them a little bit brighter. Just a few spots. I don't like that. I'm going to smooth that one out. There we go. Oh, I like this guy a lot. I know there's already bids, so I don't get to keep him, but I'm liking him. Even if he's not the happy shark my mom was looking for. Okay, now we need rays of light. And like I said, I mentioned before, I'm gonna go ahead and brush these in by hand, which I don't typically do on the rays of light, but I want these to be a little bit more defined. If they end up being too defined, all I have to do is soften them out with the airbrush. So that seemed like a good way to try one, see if I liked it, how it came out, and if not, I've got a backup plan. Now it is so important that that be dry. If that is not dry, when I start brushing these rays of light in, I could smear the shark, which I guess it's the end of the world. That could look cool too, but it's not what I'm going for. So there we go. And I'm going to go back to my trusty, maybe not. Maybe I'll use you. I'll use a smaller one. The White Sable, Robert Simmons. Where did this brush come from? That is nicer than what I usually buy. Oh, I don't know where this came from. It could have been out of one of my Smart Art boxes. Okay. So I'm going to be using, I'm going to start with transparent mixing white instead of jumping straight into the opaque white. So I can build it up with this. I'm going to thin that with water. Now this is going to be really transparent. Actually, I take it back. I'm going to mix a little bit of opaque white with it. Now this is an example too. My water is mud at this point. It doesn't matter. Like what I was talking about earlier, your water does not need to be clean to work. When I mix it in with my white, you can't tell. It's white. Like dirty water does not affect your acrylic paints at all. Okay. Now I'm going to I'm going to pull this back behind it again because I need to be able to test my brush strokes. Yeah, that's okay. So we're coming from here. And I don't like how that is too stiff or too curved. So I'm going to take a clean brush that's a little bit damp and wipe over that. That I like. And then another one. And you want these, see how that one's kind of bent? No, straighten it out. There we go. I like it. Oops, let's straighten that again over here. But see, this is what I was hoping for. See how some of this is a little bit harsher? Now when it dries, it's going to tone down some, but this is what I was going for. Whereas with the airbrush, I'd have to use a cardboard to like keep that straight. I wanted this a little bit more defined. And I'll probably go over it with a slightly more opaque white once this dries. Soften that out. Now let's say you did this and you hated it. You're new to drawing rays of light. Well, if you're new to drawing rays of light, don't do it on your project. Do a practice first. But let's say you didn't like it. It's still wet. Everything, as long as what was underneath is dry, get it wet and lift it off. Just wipe it off. You basically erase it. I'm going to just lightly come over this from what's already there. Just getting some of these a little bit more defined now. The other thing I can do is lightly mist it, take a mop brush, and slightly soften that just a little bit. Now I'm going to dry this because I want to see how translucent that really is, because I think I need to go over it a couple more times. Just going a bit farther. I am liking the results I'm getting with the brushwork though, so I'm glad I chose that method. I want to pull some of these a bit farther down. See, that went over his eye a bit too much. Like I want it there, but let's soften that. There we go. Much better. Oh, I like that. I got some red in there. Get out. That is what I was looking for. Okay, and I've got red here too. Where are you coming from? Oh, no. I'll just have to fix you later. So when I use the airbrush, it tends to be a lot softer, which is great, but with the feel of the shark, I wanted something a bit harsher. Not that you can't get defined with the airbrush, but... let that fan out just a bit. There we go. And this, I think it stands out a little bit more in person than it does on video. Normally I will often do the bubbles and such. I don't think that fits the feel or the mood of this painting. So if anything, you could kind of splatter some dots like to create atmosphere. Turn on if I want to do that. I kind of do. It just creates that little bit of atmosphere to have little dots. Yeah, I think it needs it. I think it would look really good. So one last thing, I'm going to take a very stiff, very damaged brush that has not been washed in way too long, and I'm going to get the palette knife that has been sitting on my floor all week for some reason I haven't picked up, but I know where it is because I left it there. And I'm going to do some kind of lighter blue. I don't want to do white, and I don't want to do a lot. I want it to be very subtle. I don't think it has enough water. No, I think it has too much water. And all I'm going to do is just lightly, oh yeah, that was a good call. Oh my gosh, it adds so much atmosphere. I'm going to wipe it off his face just a bit. There we go. What a difference. Oh, I love it. Love that. Okay, it doesn't look as good on camera for you guys. Hold on, I'll show you in a second. That's kind of making them look white, like big giant polka dots. They're very small, they're very subtle, and when it dries, they're not going to stand out too much. Let me dry that and then I can sign it. Oh my gosh, I'm glad I did that. You always in the water have these bubbles or particles, and that's what I wanted to create that look of. I was just one of those, ooh, I don't know, do I want it? Let me show you over here. So it's, you can't really see.
Hey, you. Yes, you. I see all your unused art supplies over there. Oh my god, those brushes aren't even opened yet. Tragic. You keep buying new fancy materials, but you don't use them because you don't want to waste them. Stop making your art supplies sad. Sign up for art lessons for as little as $4 a month. There are over 300 painting and drawing lessons available when you sign up, and new ones every week. Patreon.com/Lachri.